and beautiful woodwork, and still keeping it a little on the raw side. At the same time, I also was very interested in public projects, and I was very interested in moving into a way of understanding how architecture affected the public. And I started to enter an array of competitions. This one for the Peak in Hong Kong. You can see the site is up here, the top of Victoria's Peak. This is in the Bay of Hong Kong. The project we did was had a very elaborate brief to it. It was a competition for time-shared housing, but also buried in here was a very wealthy club, social club, and athletic facility. And I was very interested in the expression of how this could be manipulated. Also, the owners had sequestered the highest portion of the site for themselves, and the lower portion of the site was for the timeshare housing. So the scheme that was done actually only uses the housing as the main expression. The club facilities are buried into the landscape. In here, there were libraries, swimming pools, all of those large landscape stairs. There were also view easements and things that actually, in the project that won, were never really satisfied in the brief, but it was a very different kind of project, and again, really tried to look at the iconic value of the housing being the predominant feature of the landscape and of the architecture. Another project in Paris was a competition for Mitterrand's new opera in Paris. This was a project which Mitterrand came to the understanding that the old Garnier Opera House was now unaffordable by the lower and middle class. He came up with the idea that if you put on 300 operas instead of 150 or 100 operas a year, then the price could be greatly reduced. He took a very large piece of site in the middle of Paris. It was in Place de la Bastille. This parcel, and the program was rather enormous. It was over 400,000 square feet of set scenery building areas, experimental theaters. And what he wanted to do was to be able to build the sets for 5 or 7 operas at one time and then rotate them on a weekly or monthly basis, so he would have operas, they would have operas running all the time, therefore making the operas affordable. So the project that we did was called Opera for the People. It was very significant, obviously, that it was located on the site of Place de la Bastille. We found underneath the site a subway line running, so we created a station stop on this spur of the Seine River, which you could come out into an outdoor amphitheater, because part of the brief of the competition was what to do with the outdoor space. So we had this idea that you could close the square for evening performances and have opera at a very grand urban and civic scale. The interior of the opera was a drawing which really looked at exploring everybody sitting in an equidistant position from the person performing the proscenium stage. So it was based actually on the treatise of Ledoux on theaters and theater design. We had a radial performance. Of course, we had this cylinder incised into this cubic volume. The most expressive element became the cheapest seats in the house, which were the balcony seats. And then, of course, the drum had to be fractured for acoustical purposes. And then you see the rehearsal rooms above, and then projected back with the actors' dressing rooms, and then all of the set scenery and side stages, which were arrayed back in the scheme. We didn't win, needless to say. This project also was really looking at the symbolic power of doing a project for the New York Vietnam Veterans Memorial, an extremely difficult subject. I was a student, of course, during the Vietnam War, obviously a tumultuous and difficult time. And when the memorial was done in Washington, I, with a number of other architects, signed a petition. We didn't want to donate design ability, and of course, the project was won. And when they had the New York one, I wanted to enter it, but do something that really would register at an incredible level the horror of all of this. So it was a project I submitted called War of Despair, War of Assassins. And it was an enormous slab littered with corpses severed by this enormous steel blade. we were eliminated from the competition because we hung out over the highway. Apparently, Ursula von Rodingsvart, who's a sculptor, was on the jury, and one day I met her. She was teaching at Yale, and she said to me, "You know, I was just on this competition jury, and you wouldn't believe the veterans got up and they were going to leave, and the generals, they were furious because we wanted to give this prize. This crazy person did this project with this corpse-littered slab." We didn't win that one either. And of course, this was the last of that group. This is a tower. It was a competition for the redoing of the Allied Chemical building, then owned by Allied Chemical Company, and this was called Tower of Theaters. This was a memorial of 7 of the most recent Broadway theaters that had been demolished in Times Square, and they were simply reassembled into this tower on that location. But the bulk of practice throughout this period is much smaller work. This is another loft for a photographer in the Chelsea Flatiron district. You can see the Flatiron building here on the lower floor. Rather banal interior, simple cast concrete building that had been subdivided into rectangular lofts. There was actually a bedroom here in front with a kind of bowling alley, living and dining space. That wall was removed. We inserted a kind of domestic bedroom space. It was also, it faced north. It was down low in the building, had no sunlight, no light at all. So we actually designed a golden canopy that hung over the bed, which with really good lighting would produce a kind of golden sunlight in the morning when the couple got up. We also got to do all the furniture. These are side chairs and sofas and dining table. All of this made in sheet steel, same auto body shop up in the Bronx, and you can actually see the pieces being made here. This is the entry looking through, and then you can just see some of the very, very elaborate fabrication of this canopy over the bed, fitted with a couple of thousand screws, and it's suspended on a steel T with brackets, hung in tension in the front so it's not in the way and in compression against the back wall. I've also done a lot of furniture design. This chair, which I had done a room of experimental furniture for the Formica company. This is in a material which had just come out at the time, Sorel, which was the Formica version of Corian, which had also just come out a year or two before that. It's a synthetic resin material produced in sheet form. I used it in a number of projects. Here you can see some of the drawings of the chair. It's an object which really tried to explore what the physical properties of this material was, which was that you could cut it like a sheet of wood, you could mill it, dado it, route it, but you could also join it, and then they give you the material in canisters, loose, liquid, and you can smooth it over, and then you sand it out, and it has no joint at all. So I started to look at the idea of the furniture, looking at the opaque and block-solid nature of this, and looking at the thinness of the material and sheet stock, and the intricacy of how you could assemble and make the chair. This was done for a little breakfast room in a house addition we were working on in Scarsdale. The addition didn't get built, but the chair got made. We also were working on, again, the subject of historic buildings. This a barn renovation in Red Hook, New York, a project which had a barn that was made in hand-hewn timber. It was hatchet. It had been made by farmers 110 years ago with hatchets. So it had this incredible patina to these huge timbers that formed the barn. The outside had been renovated before. There was a milking shed that was quite old, near dilapidation. And then the owner had this idea about a residence for him and a guest wing. So we decided, and it had to be built in stages. So we fashioned these two environments, the owner's wing, the guest wing. You can see them here organized in the barn. They were sitting up on a columnar structure, so the ground floor was open. You can see the space between the two structures here. These intricate doors and things that allowed, and finishes that allowed the rooms to be closed off for privacy at night or opened during the day and the interior structure of the barn. This is like a reliquary of unbuilt projects, unfortunately. This is also a project in Tokyo that we did. We were invited to Japan in 1990. This was a project for the Toyota Motor Company. They were in the process of building a 20-story headquarters building with a 9-story automobile showroom, and they asked a couple of designers to come to Japan and make a proposal for a monument to the company. They gave us a footprint of, I think, 2 meters by 9 meters, and you can go up as high as you could go, but you couldn't go outside the envelope. So I went to Tokyo, looked around, and I realized the one thing you couldn't have there, it seemed, was privacy. It was very hard to be alone. And especially in the showroom, there were just thousands of people going through there, mostly kids. And we started to work on this design for a project called Tower of Silence. And what it was to provide little rooms, cabins, within which people could go, have some degree of removal from this incredible font of consumerism, and be able to look out into the city from various conditions. And then, of course, there was a karaoke theater at the back where you could actually go and perform. The structure was to be made in had a steel underlayment, and we were looking to use the Sorel sheets to fabricate the skin. They come in very long. I think they were 3.5 by 12 feet long. They were all cut with the steel structure coming through, and then had dadoed ribs standing up on the outside. It was also an exploration of all the things you could do with the material. And of course, the Formica company was interested in giving us the material molten in canisters to be able to cast the theater at the back end. Well, the Japanese bubble burst, and that was that. But we did get to realize a project for a hardware company in Japan, and it was the opposite end of a scale of operation. This was an opportunity to do something that was incredibly quick, incredibly small. They're very small handles, door handles, and in a process that was really about fabrication completely. So we were asked to come up with a line of hardware for the 21st century. We did 3 handles. There was a lever handle, a slightly larger one for public doors, and then a very large push plate pull bar. These are an array of models that we made in the studio. The first 2, paper and gesso, basswood, styrene, and then the first castings from the factory. This is one of my drawings looking at the back and front of this push plate pull bar. And I was also very interested in the tactility of it, and I was interested in recuperating an idea of a word which hadn't been used, certainly was not allowed in school at the time I was a student, which was ornament or decoration. That there were other attributes or aspects to the design of both architecture and objects that were more intangible, that were really about the overt beauty or physical and tactile beauty of the object. Here you see the smaller one, which is now made in cast aluminum, actually where I now have we have a factory facility in Jersey. We're actually fabricating them here and distributing them. The second one, which will go into production sometime soon, and the push plate pull bar, which is about 36 inches long, which are made by hand of milled and machined metal, was a very gratifying experience because it was really a way of reaching an audience and being able to bring design to people in a very different capacity. And it didn't require a building, and it was sold all over Asia, and it was a very, very nice, pleasant experience. We also got a commission slightly after that to look at a building which we thought, when we went to see it, was a modernization, both renovation, restoration, and modernization. It turned out it was a building done by Henry Ives Cobb, who was a very well-known architect at the turn of the century. We found under a very bad renovation in 1950 a lot of Cobb's original cast terracotta work and cast stone. We had these 4 photographs. It was like the movie Blow Up, for any of you who've seen it. We had these 4 photographs that we kept enlarging bigger and bigger so we could remake the original drawings and fix the material. You can see here in the restored state, we even found the 2 original heads, which had been removed in the original contractor's backyard in Westchester, in New York. Because they were made in those days, what was considered thin construction. This was masonry on a steel frame, was 12.5 inches thick, so it was worth looking for. The project was when we completed it, was very celebrated because it was, we really tried to make a hybrid of new and old techniques of decoration and form and material. Herbert Mouchamp, who wrote the review in the New York Times, really paid great credit to the ability, the stretch that we made to really find ways of having contemporary design find a way to speak in the same room, because I had always avoided it in earlier projects because there were room dividers. So we had old buildings, new interiors, but here it all had to be in the same space. It all had to coexist. So where we couldn't find floors, we redid the floor. Not to interrupt the terracotta with lighting, we put it all in the floor. We redid the ceilings with, in the same system. In the panels, they were all made from our very elaborate shop drawings. They were then made into clay molds. They made rubber clay models, rubber molds, and then castings. You're looking at one of the artisans who's going from the flat cast into the carving to get the first piece so he could make the rubber impression to make the replicate pieces. We put all the plumbing and mechanical equipment and the sprinklers that were hidden all in the construction. We made new contemporary cast lighting sconces and pieces to be embedded into the ceiling that would kind of speak in the same ornamental language. And when it was finished, it all kind of fused together, including a new desk in the lobby, which was made of sheet bronze and silver and steel and wood. Very ornamental and elaborate object, which was really very much fitting and keeping with the interior. The only place we parted company was some of the colors which we used, which had been really somber, and the owner was not interested. We also redid some of the typical floors upstairs, and again in a much more contemporary idiom, but also with a lot of the same ornamental ideas in the terrazzo flooring, in the corner guards made in milled aluminum, and you can see some of the intricacy of the desk. We did a project, another few projects, this one in the country for Philip Roth, the writer, American writer. This was his writing shed up in Kent, Connecticut. He had a 17th century farmhouse. He had an extremely bad back, I suspect from typing, and wanted a swimming pool, an indoor swimming pool built so he could swim laps and then go back and write. Did not want a masonry building. He wanted something that was, the word warm and comfortable came up, and wood. So this was actually one of our first entrees into completely wooden building.